All right, everyone, time for more news you didn't hear from anyone else because the entire world is looking away. 1,200 now dead in the Ebola epidemic in the Congo. I think last update it was barely 1,000 cases, I think, and now it's 1,200 dead. Still in North Kivu province, burning through. It's still expanding rapidly. It's picking up steam. Now, they said that they deployed vaccine and vaccinated, I think it was 120,000 people or something. That's probably not going to help since just Butembo alone has, what, 600,000 or 700,000 people? Good luck making enough vaccine fast enough, assholes. You should have seen this coming in the first place, and you're not even sure that this vaccine is particularly effective. You're saying, well, in the field it shows good results. Okay, are you deliberately exposing people to Ebola to see what happens? They've also got that experimental serum that lowers the death rate by like 20 or 30%. Okay, that's good. It means that the world doesn't end right away if it goes worldwide, but it could happen. The problem with these epidemics is never the cases you have, it's always the cases you can have. If it's not quarantined, if it's not contained, if it's not treatable, if it's not curable, that's the real problem. And so the Ebola research was slow. Back when, Africa had a lower population density, I think one of the other major outbreaks was like back in the 70s or something. This was a big thing, humanitarian struggle and stuff like that. Africa news was a big thing in the 70s and the 80s. But what would happen is, most of Africa was still very rural, and there wasn't a whole lot of trade and travel outside of major metro areas, where people tended to be more well-educated. They knew not to eat, like, chimp meat and weird shit like that. The problem is now even these smaller outlying regions are rapidly expanding in population. You have a lot of slums in the urban parts of Africa, with people who are actually worse off than those that are literally living out in a jungle somewhere. Literally, if you're living in a slum in Freetown or something like that, you're worse off than if you literally wandered off into the jungle to be a hunter-gatherer. Ultimately, you'll probably live a shorter and more miserable life than people who literally, have no trade or travel whatsoever, have virtually no contact with the outside world. It's quite fascinating that this weird bipolar existence exists there in Africa at all. But the unfortunate part is, you've got a rapidly advancing population, you've got the encroaching of world trade, world travel, and national travel certainly expanding in Africa, and yet you have no real medical infrastructure. And so the outside world has to keep coming in and helping out. The problem is the outside world never assumed, I think, that Ebola would rapidly mutate. And in the last epidemic, in the one in West Africa, they realized after it was over that it had fundamentally mutated twice. The first mutation made it more transmissible. 10-something thousand people die. Biggest Ebola outbreak by far in history. Thankfully, by random chance, this could have been a 1 in a million chance to save, millions of people's lives, or perhaps more if it had mutated further in the other direction. You got an asymptomatic variant that was produced that infected a bunch of people, giving them immunity, or at least resistance, and burned the epidemic out. That's essentially what happened. Reservoirs of people either were all immune or all dead at that point, and so it destroyed itself. It has entered now, though, a metropolitan region that is considerably larger, considerably more densely populated, Butembo and some of these other areas, than anything that was approached by Ebola in the West Africa epidemic. That's number one. Number two, there's no guarantee that you will end up with an asymptomatic genetic mutant that will inoculate people. You could instead get the opposite, and this is what really scares me. This is what you should be terrified by. It's not the cases of Ebola as is right now. It's not capable of becoming a global pandemic. It's not transmissible enough. In a first world situation, Ebola cannot become a pandemic in its current genetic state. All it takes is 1 or 2 minor tweaks to its genetic code to make it fully airborne, to make it more easily replicated through droplets or something like that, to make it more likely to cause the person to run flu-like symptoms longer and potentially infect more people before it kills them or makes them symptomatic of Ebola so that they end up getting thrown in an Ebola ward and quarantined. All you need is some sort of mutant like that to take hold, and all of a sudden it isn't, 100 new cases this week, this is worrying. It's, 100,000 new cases this week. Get into the bunker. And, and then the more cases you have, the more other potential mutants you have. Now, thankfully, I don't think there will ever come a disease that will kill all human beings. because if it shows a readiness to mutate, it can mutate again, and you'll tend to get those asymptomatic strains, or you'll get a strain that doesn't have a 100% death rate. It'll only kill like 1 in 100 people, and so there will always be reservoirs of humans left. The problem is if enough people die, we basically go back to square one. We live in a world where there are nuclear plants that have to be maintained or they melt down. We live in a world where satellites have to be maintained or you lose half your technology. Electricity and oil extraction fuel everything. And you need certain people with certain qualifications to keep these systems going. And then you talk about, well, we can automate them. Okay, yeah, you can do that. You still have to have people that are capable of maintaining a robot. Unless you just want to create a robotic, self-replicating race to replace all of mankind. And they'll eventually get diseases too. It's not like robots can't be infected. Ever hear of a computer virus? They'll eventually arise by random chance too. It's just the way that things are. Things tend to become corrupted over time, and those corruptions can become replicating. No, it can't be an immortal race for this reason. Other than those jellyfish, apparently. They'll take over the world. Pretty soon it'll be like a Lovecraft mythos. We'll just have giant gooey creatures oozing around using us as slaves or something like that. But as far as Ebola goes, it's no laughing matter. Because unfortunately, yes, it is capable of mutating. It did so twice during the last epidemic. And it didn't have that many cases. When it started to rise up and kill a lot more people, that was fairly early on. It was after a few months. This is a ticking time bomb. It's already in a major metropolitan area. If you get a variant that's more transmissible in an area like Butembo, you can kill 100,000 people before the world can respond. That's sad. What if it escapes from Congo altogether, enters several other neighboring states? You will begin to have a mass panic in all of East and Central Africa. That's what you'll end up with. Airports will begin closing. You know, the famous joke, Madagascar has closed its port. Well, you know, you've lost the game at that point. Maybe we should all go to Madagascar. Oh, wait, they've got plague that's endemic there. Wonderful. All you need is one mutation there. I guess we have another Black Death, or I suppose. We should be getting serious about eradicating diseases that show a readiness to mutate. The other ones, fuck them. We should be focusing on flu and Ebola and some of these others, but instead we keep focusing on Jimmy Carter, for all his positive traits, very nice dude. He's obsessed with guinea worms. Maybe his next target should be Ebola. I'm fully convinced that when the last guinea worm is eradicated, then he'll finally die. And not until then. Like, I think at this point, the only thing keeping that dude, he's like 90-something years old. The only thing keeping him going is saying, okay, I want to wait till the last one is dead. Then I can die. This is a fucking war. I want to see my glory. That's what Jimmy Carter wants. He's a very interesting character. Maybe he should get involved with the Ebola epidemic. It'd probably do better than Doctors Without Borders at this point. The UN won't even declare it a global health crisis. Yeah, it's not a health... Yeah, no, fuck it. It's okay if 1,000 people die. It's okay if 1,200 people die with a disease that can easily mutate. It doesn't really matter. Oh, it hit a major metro area, and it's near one that has more than 1 million people and an international airport. That's okay. That's fine. We'll take care of it. We'll just make more vaccine. How many months will that take? These people don't know what fire they're playing with sometimes. That's about all. Peace out.